Hello, my name's Valerie Still. I am the great-great-grandniece of William Still, and it's an honor, privilege, and just awesome for me to be here to celebrate Uncle William's 200th birthday anniversary with me reading from a family heirloom, 1872 first edition of his Underground Railroad book, and it's always just brings me so much joy and empowerment when I read his material. What I like to do is just take a couple seconds and invoke or remember all those brave men, women, children who used the most radical form of social protest to pursue their freedom. And so let's just take a couple seconds, and then I'll start the reading of the preface of the Underground Railroad. Okay. The Underground Railroad, a record of facts, authentic narratives, letters, and company, narrating the hardships, hairbreadth escapes, and death struggles of the slaves in their effort for freedom as related by themselves and others, or witnessed by the author, together with sketches of some of the largest stockholders and most liberal aiders and advisors of the road, by William Still. For many years connected with the Anti-Slavery Office in Philadelphia and the chairman of the Acting Vigilant Committee of the Philadelphia branch of the Underground Railroad. Illustrated with 70 fine engravings by Bensel, Shell, and others, and portraits from photographs from life. Thou shalt not deliver unto his master the slave that has escaped from his master unto thee. Deuteronomy 23:15. Sold only by subscription. And there is my favorite, can you see that? My favorite picture of Uncle William Still. Dedication to the friends of freedom, to heroic fugitives, and their prosperity in the United States. These memorials of their love of liberty are inscribed by the author. Preface. Whereas the position of William Still in the Vigilance Committee connected with the quote-unquote Underground Railroad as its corresponding secretary and chairman of its active subcommittee gave him peculiar facilities for collecting interesting facts pertaining to this branch of the anti-slavery service. Therefore, resolved that the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society request him to compile and publish his personal reminiscence and experiences relating to, quote-unquote, the Underground Railroad. In compliance with this resolution, unanimously passed at the closing meeting of the Pennsylvania Anti-Slavery Society, held last May in Philadelphia, the writer in the following pages willingly and he hopes satisfactorily discharges his duty. In these records will be found interesting narratives of the escapes of many men, women, and children from the prison houses of bondage, from cities and plantations, from rice swamps and cotton fields, from kitchens and mechanic shops, from border states and Gulf states, from cruel masters and mild masters, some guided by the North Star alone, penniless, braving the perils of land and sea, eluding the keen scent of the bloodhound, as well as the more dangerous pursuit of the savage slave hunter. Some from secluded dens and caves of the earth, where for months and years they have been hidden away, waiting for the chance to escape. From mountains and swamps, where indescribable suffering from hunger and other privations have patiently been endured. Occasionally, fugitives came in boxes and chests, and not infrequently some were secreted in steamers and vessels, and in some instances journeyed hundreds of miles in skiffs. Men disguised in female attire and women disguised in the garb of men have, under very trying circumstances, triumphed in thus making their way to freedom. And here and there, when all other modes of escape seemed cut off, some whose fair complexions have rendered them indistinguishable from their Anglo-Saxon brethren, feeling that they could endure the yoke no longer, with assumed airs of importance, such as they have been accustomed to see their masters show that when traveling, have taken the usual mode of conveyance, and have even braved the most scrutinizing inspections of slave holders, slave catchers, and car conductors, who were ever on the alert to catch those who were considered base and wide enough to practice such deception. Passes have been written and used by fugitives with their masters' and mistresses' names boldly attached thereto, and have answered admirably as a protection when passing through ignorant country districts of slave regions, where but few, either white or color, knew how to read or write correctly. Not a few, upon arriving, of course, hardly had rags enough on them to cover their nakedness, even in the coldest weather. It scarcely needs be stated that, as a general rule, the passengers of the UGRR were physically and intellectually above the average order of slaves. They were determined to have liberty, even at the cost of life. The slave auction block indirectly proved to be, in some respects, a very active agent in the promoting travel on the UGRR, just as Jeff Davis was an agent in helping to bring about the downfall of slavery. The horrors of the block, as looked upon through the light of the daily heartbreaking separations it was causing to the oppressed, no pen could describe or mind imagine. Hence it will be seen that many of the passengers, whose narratives will be found in this work, ascribe their first underlying resolution to strike for freedom to the auction block, or to the fear of soon having to take their chances thereon. But other agencies were at work in the South, which in various ways aided directly or tacitly the UGRR cause. To reference in detail any considerable number of these agents would be impossible if necessary. Some there were who nobly periled their all for the freedom of the oppressed, whose suffering and deeds of bravery must have a fitting place in this volume. Where in history, modern or ancient, could be found a more Christ-like exhibition of love and humanity, of whole-soul devotion to freedom, than was proven in the character of the hero Seth Conklin, who lost his life while endeavoring to rescue from Alabama slavery the wife and children of Peter Still. So also do the heroic and faithful services of Samuel D. Burris demand special reference and commemoration for his connection with the UGRR. Cost him not only imprisonment and the most barbarous treatment, but likewise the loss of his freedom. He was sold on the auction block. Here too come the overwhelming claims of S.A. Smith, who at the sad cost to himself of many of the best years of his life in the Richmond Penitentiary, boxed up Henry Box Brown and others in Richmond and committed them to Adams' Express office to be carried in this most extraordinary manner to freedom. We must not omit from these records the boldness and the hazard of the unparalleled undertakings of Captain Drayton, Lee, Bayliss, and Company. While the Vigilance Committee of Philadelphia was in no wise responsible for the suffering incurred by many of those who helped the slave, yet in order to show how men were moved to lend an ear to those hungry and thirsting for freedom, and to what extent the relentless spirit of slavery would go in wreaking vengeance upon them, out of the many who were called upon to suffer, thus the individual cases here brought forward must suffice. Without introducing a few of such incidences, the records would necessarily be incomplete. Those who come after us seeking for information in regards to the existence, atrocity, struggles, and destruction of slavery will have no trouble in finding this hydra-headed monster ruling and tyrannizing over church and state, north and south, white and black, without let or hindrance, for at least several generations. Nor will prosperity have any difficulty in finding the deeds of the brave and invincible opposers of slavery, who, in the language of William Lloyd Garrison, declared without concealment and without compromise, quote, "I am in earnest. I will not equivocate. I will not excuse. I will not retreat a single inch, and I will be heard," unquote. While this resolute spirit actuated the hearts of all true abolitionists, it was a peculiar satisfaction and gratification to them to know that the slaves themselves were struggling and hungering for deliverance. Hence, such evidence from this quarter never failed to meet with hearty sympathy and aid. But here the enemy was never willingly allowed to investigate. The slave and his particular friends could only meet in private to transact the business of the Underground Railroad. All others were outsiders. The right hand was not to know what the left hand was doing. Stockholders did not expect any dividends, nor did they request special reports to be published. Indeed, prudence often dictated that even the recipients of our favor should not know the names of their helpers, and vice versa. They did not desire to know theirs. The risk of aiding fugitives was never lost sight of, and the safety of all concerned called for still tongues. Hence, sad and thrilling stories were listened to and made deep impressions. But as a universal rule, friend and fugitive parted with only very vivid recollection of the secret interview and with mutual sympathy. For a length of time, no narratives were written. The writer, in common with others, took no notes. But after the restoration of Peter Still, his own brother, in parentheses, the kidnapped and the ransom, after 40 years' cruel separation from his mother, the wonderful discovery and joyful reunion, the ideal forced itself upon him, his mind, that all over this wide and extended country, thousands of mothers and children separated by slavery were in a similar way living without the slightest knowledge of each other's whereabouts, praying and weeping without ceasing, as did this mother and son. Under these reflections, it seems reasonable to hope that by carefully gathering the narratives of the Underground Railroad passengers, in some way or other, some of the bleeding and severed hearts might be united and comforted. And by the use that might be made privately, if not publicly, of just such facts as would mutually be embraced in their brief narratives, reunions might take place. For years, it was the writer's privilege to see many travelers, to receive from their own lips the most interesting and in many cases exceedingly thrilling accounts of their struggles for freedom, and to learn who had held them in bondage, how they had been treated, what prompted them to escape, and whom that were near and dear to them they had left in chains. Their hopes, fears, and sufferings were thus recorded in a book. It scarcely need be added, with no exception, however, that the day was so near when these things could be published. It is now a source of great satisfaction to feel that not only these numerous narratives may be published, but that in connection therewith, for the completeness of the work, many interesting private letters from fugitives in Canada, slaves in the South, Underground Railroad conductors and stockholders, and last and least, from slaveholders in the bargain, all having a direct bearing on the mysterious road. In the use of these various documents, the writer begs to assure his reader that the most scrupulous care has been taken to furnish artless stories, simple facts, to resort to no coloring to make this book seem romantic, as he is fully persuaded that any exaggeration or addition of his own could not possibly equal in its surpassing interest the original and natural tales given under circumstances when life and death seemed about equally balanced in the scale, and the fugitive in transit were making their way from slavery to freedom with the horrors of the fugitive slave law staring them in the face. Thousands were either directly or indirectly interested in this enterprise, and in all probability 2 generations will pass away before many who are now living witnesses to the truth of these records will cease to bring vividly to mind the hour and circumstance when for the first time they were led to resort to this road to escape the quote-unquote barbarism of slavery. Far be it from the writer to assume, however, that these records cover the entire Underground Railroad operations. Many local branches existed in different parts of the country, which neither time nor limit would allow mention of in this connection. Good men labored and suffered, who deserved to be held in the highest admiration by the friends of freedom, whose names may be looked for in vain in these pages, for which reason some may be inclined to complain. With respect to these points, it may here be remarked that in gathering narratives from unwritten sources, from memory simply, no amount of pains or labor could possibly succeed in making a trustworthy history. The writer has deemed it best, therefore, to confine himself to facts coming within his personal knowledge and to the records of his own preserving, which, by the way, are quite too voluminous to all be used in this work. Frequent abridgments and omissions must be made. The writer is fully conscious of his literary imperfections. The time allotted him from other pressing duties is, moreover, exceedingly limited. Nevertheless, he feels that he owes it to the cause of freedom and to the fugitives and their prosperity, in particular, to bring the doings of the UGRR before the public in the most truthful manner. Not for the purpose of amusing the reader, but to show what efforts were made and what success was gained for freedom under difficulties. That some professing a love of liberty at this late date will be disposed to criticize some of the methods resorted to in aiding in the escape of the fugitives, as herein recounted, may be expected. While the writer holds the labors of abolitionists generally in very grateful appreciation, he hopes not to be regarded as making any invidious discriminations in favor of the individual friends of the slave, whose names may be brought out prominently in this work, as it is not with the anti-slavery question, Prosper, that he is dealing, but simply the Underground Railroad. In order, therefore, fittingly to bring the movement of this enterprise to light, the writer could not justly confine himself to the acting committee, but felt constrained to bring in others, friends, who never forsake the fugitive, who visited him in prison, clothed him when he was naked, fed him when hungry, wept with him when he wept, and cheered him with their warmest sympathies and friendship. In addition to the names of the acting committee, he has felt constrained to beg the portraits of the following stockholders and advisors of the board, whose names will be found on the next page, and in thus presenting a brief sketch of their labors, he feels that the true friends of the slave, in recognizing them in this connection with many of the once fugitives, in parentheses, now citizens, will regard it as a tribute to the anti-slavery cause rather than the individuals themselves. William Still, Philadelphia, January 1872.